what I discovered challenged everything I thought I knew about this place. When I was first introduced to the Osirion on a study trip with John Anthony West, I was hooked.
A team of workers digs through 50 feet of desert sand and hits something solid. They expect more bricks, but instead they find a sunken island made of 100-ton granite blocks. This is the Osirion, and it is officially the weirdest place in Egypt. It is permanently flooded by water rising from deep underground. This was not a mistake, but a deliberate choice by the builders. Everything about this site breaks the rules of logic.
Below the surface is where you find the megalithic. This is the Osirion. Question is, how much older is this?
Basically, the deeper the water gets, the more the official story falls apart. Every single block of stone is a massive question mark. Hidden depths of the sunken tomb. The story of this sunken tomb begins with a smell that had been trapped for centuries. In 1902, an archaeologist named Margaret Murray was working at the site of Abydos. Her team was busy digging behind the famous Temple of Seti I. Suddenly, they broke through into a dark, hollow space. A heavy, damp scent hit them immediately. It was the smell of ancient water that had been sitting undisturbed for thousands of years. As their light swept across the room, the workers went silent. They were looking at massive granite walls rising out of black water. This structure was not on any map and no records mentioned its existence. For a long time, this giant building stayed buried and invisible under 50 feet of sand. It was completely submerged in groundwater. This megalithic monument was so big and so strange that it broke every rule experts thought they knew. This place is known as the Osirion. What scientists found beneath the sand has never been explained in a way that makes sense. The scale of the building is almost impossible to imagine. The Osirion is made from granite and limestone blocks that weigh over 100 tons each. To put that in perspective, one stone weighs as much as 16 African elephants or 50 crushed cars. Someone had to take these blocks from mountains in Aswan, that is over 120 miles to the south. They had to drag these stones across the desert and place them with perfect accuracy. The joints between the stones are still tight after thousands of years of being underwater. The main hall is about 98 feet long and 65 feet wide. Some of the individual stones are over 16 feet long. Official history says Pharaoh Seti I built this around 1290 years before the Common Era, but there is a huge problem with that story. The Temple of Seti sits directly above the Osirion. That temple is one of the most beautiful buildings in Egypt. It has complex carvings and delicate columns that show the best work of that time. The difference between the two buildings is like night and day. The Osirion has almost no decorations at all. It is made of giant, plain blocks in a style that looks very old and heavy. There are no carvings explaining what the building was for. There are no notes saying it belongs to Seti or any other leader. It is very strange to think that the same person built two structures that look like they come from different worlds. A geologist named Robert Schoch looked at the wear on the stones. He noticed that the water damage on the granite does not match a building that is only 3,000 years old. The damage is way too deep. The stones look much, much older than the temple sitting on top of them. There are only a few ways to build with stone, but this seems like something else. In some spots, the techniques used here look like they belong to a lost way of building. The stones are screaming a truth that most people are too afraid to hear. Forgotten architects of the sunken island. The official story for why these buildings look so different is called archaism. Experts claim that Seti I wanted the Osirion to look old on purpose. They say he wanted it to look primitive to honor Osiris, who was the god of the dead. The idea is that he copied building styles from 1,000 years before his time to make a connection to the past. Basically, they want people to believe that the pharaoh was just pretending to build an ancient structure. But this is where the logic starts to fail. While pharaohs did copy old art styles or writing, they did not usually copy ancient engineering. Copying a style means drawing things a certain way. It does not mean moving 100-ton blocks across the desert for no reason. Constructing a giant complex using methods that had been dead for 10 centuries is not just a style choice. That would be like a modern builder using only hand tools and giant rocks to build a house today. It just does not happen. Seti I was a leader who loved to brag about what he built. He covered his main temple with writing that celebrated his life and his power. But inside the Osirion, the silence is very loud. There are no records of the construction and no texts saying he finished the project. This is very suspicious for a man who documented every other thing he did. The evidence becomes impossible to ignore when comparing this site to another famous place. The Valley Temple at Giza was built around 2,500 years before the Common Era. It was part of the pyramid complex. It also has giant granite blocks and almost no decorations. It has the same simple and heavy style. If you put a picture of the Valley Temple next to the Osirion, they look like twins. They use the same materials and the same scale of stones. The Valley Temple was built over 1,000 years before Seti was even born. Engineers have looked at the precision of the stonework in the Osirion. They found that the quality of the work matches the time of the pyramids, not the time of Seti. The way the corners are shaped and the way the doors were carved out is very specific. The tool marks and the tight joints show a level of skill that was common in the old days. By the time Seti was alive, people had stopped moving stones this big. It was an extraordinary exception, not a normal practice. This leads to a question that no one wants to answer. Why would a pharaoh perfectly copy a dead building style for just one project and then never use it again? Things get even crazier when looking at the environmental damage. The mystery of the water damage is about to turn into a massive crisis for history. Evidence in the erosion patterns. Researchers who looked at the blocks found erosion patterns that do not fit the official timeline. There is massive water damage and long-term exposure to the elements. This weathering is much worse than what is seen on the Temple of Seti. Even though both buildings are in the same spot, they do not look the same age. If both were built 3,000 years ago, they should look similar. They do not. The Osirion looks like it has been there for thousands of years longer. An expert named John Anthony West once visited the site and was shocked by what he saw. He believed the building belonged to a totally different chapter of history. This is a chapter that the official books refuse to talk about. One of the wildest parts of the Osirion is that it sits right at the water table. The center of the building is always flooded. This creates an island that sits in the middle of dark water. This was not an accident or a mistake in planning. The engineering shows that the builders wanted it to be this way. The foundations were made to handle being wet all the time. The stones are heavy enough to stay in place despite the pressure of the water. The joints are tight enough to keep the whole thing from falling apart. This means someone built a giant monument specifically to exist underwater. They understood exactly where the groundwater was. They made a building that could last for thousands of years while submerged. Why would anyone do that? Some people think the flooded room had a special use that we do not understand. Stone rooms filled with water have amazing acoustic properties. Sound moves differently in these spaces. The resonance changes and frequencies get louder. It is possible the Osirion was built to create specific sounds during old rituals. Some even wonder if it was a type of machine. In old stories, the world began as a mound of dirt rising out of water. The Osirion looks like a physical version of that story. But was it just a symbol or was it something more? The engineering needed to keep a building standing underwater for so long is incredible. It is way better than the usual work done during the time of Seti. It fits better with the peak of Egyptian building skill during the age of the pyramids. The high level of skill used here seemed to disappear as time went on. Lost technology and the first time. After the time of the pyramids ended, the ability to move 200-ton blocks seemed to vanish. Later dynasties built great temples with beautiful art, but they did not work with giant megalithic stones very often. That knowledge was lost to history. So, the official story asked people to believe that Seti suddenly brought this dead technology back to life. He supposedly found resources that no other pharaoh of his time could match. He built something using methods that had not been used for a millennium. Then he left it plain and wrote nothing about it. This does not make much sense when looking at the facts. There is another explanation that fits the evidence much better. The theory is that Seti I did not build the Osirion at all. It might be much older than anyone thinks. It could have been built during the same time as the pyramids or even before them. Over hundreds of years, sand and dirt could have buried the building until it was gone. When Seti started building his temple, he probably discovered the ancient structure under the ground. He might have even known it was there from old records. He decided to build his own temple on top of it and connect them. He claimed the old monument as the tomb of Osiris to make his own temple more important. This theory explains why the architecture looks so old. It explains why the weathering is so bad. It also explains why there are no decorations from Seti's time on the main blocks. The only writing found that mentions Seti is in the outer areas and connecting halls. This is exactly where you would expect to find it if someone found an old building and added to it. The main hall has no writing that dates it to any specific pharaoh. It is completely empty. But mainstream experts will not touch this idea. The signs at the site in the guidebook still say Seti built it. The official story is locked in place even though engineers have many doubts. People who study stone placement see old techniques everywhere. The truth is standing in plain sight, but it is covered by water and old ideas. The mystery is not hidden in a secret room, but in the stones themselves. Final echoes of a hidden age. The Osirion is a direct challenge to the way we think about the past. Every giant granite block is a piece of evidence. Every tight joint is a question that needs an answer. One choice is to believe in many impossible coincidences. This means believing Seti brought back dead building styles and then forgot them immediately. The other choice is to change one date in the history books. Accepting that the building is older makes everything else make sense. The stones do not lie and the engineering does not trick anyone. The weathering tells a story to anyone who is willing to listen. That story says we have been dating this civilization wrong for a very long time. The Osirion waits beneath the sand and water. It has kept its secrets for thousands of years. It is time to start listening to what the building is actually saying. What most people do not realize is that we might be missing the most important part of the story. If this building is older than the pharaohs, then our whole understanding of human progress needs to change. The technology used to build this place was elite. It was precise and it was powerful. We are looking at the work of a culture that understood the earth and its waters perfectly. They built for eternity and they succeeded. Now the question is whether we are brave enough to accept what we see. The water continues to rise and fall inside the central chamber. The granite pillars stand strong against the pressure of time. The Osirion is a bridge to a time we do not understand. It is a reminder that the past is much deeper than the sand on the surface. We are just beginning to scratch the surface of what was really happening in ancient Egypt. The logic of the stones is clear, and it points to a history that is much more exciting than the one in the books. Is the official timeline of Egypt a lie or just a big mistake? Tell us what you think in the comments. Subscribe and like to keep uncovering the truths they hide.